processing plants have had tens of thousands of workers affected. In some 19 states across the country, there have been over 130,000 workers affected by the over 4,900 positive COVID-19 cases found at those plants. So far, 20 people have lost their lives who are working to help keep the food supply moving. The stats show that over 100 of those facilities have had positive cases. Texas now has at least 3 plants where workers have tested positive after we learned of the South Texas Beef Company in Annabelle with a handful of positive tests so far.